Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good one, and welcome back to World of Warships with Rear Admiral Jingles, where today, in this Tier 9 ranked battle, domination mode, on the Northern Waters map, Steinsvarg P here, in the German Tier 9 battlecruiser, the Prinz Ruprecht, is going to be having a rather frustrating time, mostly, but not entirely, down to one of the enemy destroyers, the Jingles. The ship he's sailing, the Prinz Ruprecht, as I'm sure most of you are probably aware, is a damn fine ship. In fact, you know, there are a lot of very, very good Tier 9 ships in World of Warships. They rarely get the opportunity to flex their muscles by being top tier because of Tier 10, and with the advent of super ships, effectively Tier 11 matchmaking. So I quite like the idea of these Tier 9 ranked battles where, you know, everybody's Tier 9, so you actually get the opportunity to flex your Tier 9 muscles in a way that you wouldn't with regular matchmaking. And the Prinz Ruprecht is a very, very good ship. I mean, it doesn't have any armour. It's a battle cruiser rather than a battleship, but that's common of all of the German battle cruisers. Although, surprisingly, the World War I German battle cruisers were very well armoured. It's why they didn't blow up as spectacularly. It's one of the reasons why. There were others. But one of the reasons why they didn't blow up as spectacularly as the British battle cruisers during World War I at the Battle of Jutland. Although it's kind of ironic because the Prinz Ruprecht sits up here at Tier 9. And other German battle cruisers that did see service at the Battle of Jutland in 1916, like the Tier 4 Moltke and the Tier 5 Derfflinger, I mean, they're all the way down there at Tier 4 and 5 because they're First World War battle cruisers, but the Prinz Ruprecht, even though it sits at Tier 9, was actually, technically, a World War I design. It was developed from projects that first saw the light of day in 1918. I do also find it kind of amusing that when you actually go to the World of Warships Wikipedia page entry on the Prinz Ruprecht, and it talks about how it varied from the initial 1918 design, it talks about the secondaries. Well, it's not just the secondaries. The original design was planned to have 16.5-inch guns, but in fact only 16 inches is still big guns, but only has 16-inch guns. But it's regarding the ship's secondaries where you reach the point of amusement and contradiction. It goes on to explain that the original design was supposed to have 8 150mm secondaries, but was revised down to 6, whereas the ship actually has 12 150mm secondaries, and wait for it, 20 105mm secondaries. They're contradicting themselves on the same page. Ship does have good secondaries though, and it's a big improvement over its predecessor at Tier 8, the Zieten. It's got an extra turret with 2 extra 16-inch guns, the concealment is way better, and the secondaries, I mean the Zieten secondaries aren't bad, but the secondaries on the Prinz Ruprecht are outstanding. They have great range, great accuracy, and as we've already discussed, she has a lot of them. And they theoretically allow you to do something in the Prinz Ruprecht that very few other ships in the game can do, and we'll talk about that when I get a chance, because right now, things are getting interesting. The Iowa up there just took a torpedo hit from the enemy Jingles, and we're going to be seeing a lot more. Well, we won't be seeing the enemy Jingles much. That's kind of the problem, but he will be featuring quite heavily. Meanwhile, thanks largely to the Jaeger up there, you can just see disappearing off to the left of the screen as even more torpedoes come in. The team have managed to flip the one uncontested cap circle, because both teams start off with 1 at Bravo and Charlie, but the team have managed to flip. Oh, this is going to be tight. Is he going to? Yes, he's managed to just scrape that torpedo. But that's 2 cap circles now, thanks to the Jaeger. So the team have started with an advantage. They now, of course, need to hold on to it. And they are, of course, all spotted, again, thanks to the enemy Jingles. And that Jingles is going to be posing, well, a particular problem not just to the Iowa and the Prinz Ruprecht here, but also to the friendly destroyer, the Jaeger, which coincidentally is another World War I design that somehow ended up at Tier 9. Thankfully, the enemy Kitakazi isn't going to be a problem. He just got torpedoed and sunk by the friendly Kitakazi. The Jingles, however, is going to be an entirely different problem. There goes the Hydro. And there's the enemy Pommern. Now, Steinsvarg did realise that this guy was coming. He did have the guns pointing and ready to go. But despite the fact that he had a nice flat broadside to shoot out, the amount of damage that he did was relatively disappointing. Because unlike the Prinz Ruprecht, that's an actual battleship with actual armour. And here we see the Jingles, even though we don't actually see the Jingles because he clearly knows what he's doing, but he is becoming a real pain in the arse. There's the Pommen's torpedoes as well. Steinsvarg takes one. Frankly, he was lucky that that was all that he took, but the Iowa gets absolutely obliterated. The Pommen's turning around, and the Pommen's secondaries are no laughing matter either. Steinsvarg's trying to get a heel off, but he's in a bad spot. He needs to continue to angle against the Pommen's guns. Technically, the Prinz Ruprecht has a more powerful main armament, because it's on with 16 rather than the 15-inch guns on the Pommen, but the Pommen can take a hit, especially at close range, where its turtleback citadel armor protection makes it basically impossible to citadel. The Prinz Ruprecht enjoys no such benefits. So he's managed to disengage from the Pommen. There is, of course, a Musashi up there with 18.1-inch guns. And, of course, that dastardly Yugamo is continuing to keep him spotted. He does still have the Jaeger, however. Oh, here come the shells from... Oh, this is bad. I mean, he can really, really hurt the Musashi. And he was very lucky that that was the worst that the Musashi was able to do to him, although he doesn't do an awful lot of damage to the Musashi in return. But he's managed to execute the turn without taking catastrophic damage and can now hopefully weather any further hits from the Musashi on his belt, and also potentially the Pommen, who might be coming around the corner of that island too. And while this isn't a great situation for Steinsvarg to be in, I think the Jaeger is about to get himself into an even worse one. Oh, took some more big hits there from the Musashi, because the Jaeger, while it does have excellent stealth, it only has 3 guns. It's one of the few non-Japanese destroyers in the game, and the Yugamo has just popped up, because again, he knows exactly what he's doing, and there is very little reason for him to not get into a gunfight with a Jaeger, because even though he is not a Japanese gunboat destroyer, he can still comfortably expect to win the gunfight. And if things start going badly for him, for example, he's getting peppered by Prinz Ruprecht secondaries, he's got a smoke screen, and the Jaeger does not. And it looks like the Jaeger is also now getting pummeled by the Pommen's secondaries. You see, the Jaeger is all about the torpedoes, and it looks like he was trying to get close enough to torpedo either the Pommen or the Musashi, or possibly both, and he forgot about the threat posed by the Yugamo. And that is the kind of mistake that you only get to make once. So with the loss of the Jaeger, the team are now down a kill, and despite the fact that Steinsvarg team have 2 of the cap circles, the enemy team are not that far behind, and there is very, very little that Steinsvarg can do other than lurking around inside torpedo range. There's very little that he can do to prevent the Yugamo from taking that cap circle. He cannot sit there on half health, spotted by a Yugamo, potentially getting torpedoed by the Yugamo, lit up for all the world to see, and getting shot at by actual battleships with actual armour. He cannot sustain that kind of damage. In fact, the secondaries from the Pommen, I don't think he's actually received any main battery hits from the Pommen or the Musashi, but the secondaries from the Pommen are causing him substantial problems. I mean, his secondaries are causing problems to the Pommen as well, but the Pommen can take it, and he can't. So he's managed to disengage. But there's now basically nothing he can do to prevent that Yugamo from slipping into the cap circle at Alpha and flipping it for the enemy team. The enemy team that are already ahead 1 kill. And if he tries to contest that cap circle, and the Yugamo's gotten him spotted again, even though it's not actually in the cap circle, so it's probably hooked around to the left there and is spotting him from that direction. Oh, he's managed to land a torpedo hit or 2 on the Pommen. That's useful. And he does have... I mean, technically he's got an island between himself and the Musashi, but at this range I'm pretty sure the Musashi shells are just going to sail clean over the top of it and still be able to hit him. And here comes the continued pounding from the Pommen secondaries. There is no way he can contest that cap circle directly. Oh, actually, I think the Yugamo is in the cap circle, because there's no way the Pommen, I don't think it actually entered the cap circle at any point. I mean, the Pommen's taken a beating here. It's eaten 1 torpedo, and the secondaries are continuing to strike. But, I mean, you know, its secondaries are continuing to strike back too. But the big threat, of course, is the Yugamo. The Pommen's broken line of sight and is still alive, and the secondaries are still coming in, but he's still spotted by that Yugamo, who has managed to flip that cap circle. So while they currently enjoy a 100-point lead over the enemy team, And the Pommern secondaries have now stopped firing, although not because the Pommern doesn't have anything to shoot at. Steinsvarg is still spotted by the Yugomo. I think he's just headed far enough south that he's managed to outrange the Pommern's guns. Oh, and the team have just lost another ship. There goes the Tier 9 cruiser, the Azure. Although it's not all terrible news, because while the Yugomo has managed to flip the cap circle at Alpha, if you have a look at cap circle Bravo, which started off in enemy possession, the friendly Kitakazi, who is the one who opened up the scoreboard by sinking the enemy Kitakazi, he is doing his level best to try to flip that cap circle. So it's not all going down at this side of the map. You know, the rest of the team, they're doing their part too. And he's managed to flip it. Although with the enemy destroyer threat being over at this side of the map rather than where the friendly Kitakazi is and no carrier in play, there was very little the enemy team could do to actually prevent them from taking that cap. But the team do now enjoy that double cap advantage, even though they're down 2 kills. So it's all going to be about defending those 2 cap circles. Well, they only really have to defend the one that they've just taken at Bravo, and that, of course, is going to be the responsibility of the Kitakazi who flipped it and the friendly Pommern who's with him, because there is nothing that Steinsvarg can do to help. He's basically running for his life. He's managed to go undetected again, which gives you some idea of the relative location of where the Yugomo must be if it can't see him anymore. And now it can see him again. But how do you deal with this? Because you have to deal with it if you're going to stand the slightest chance of winning. At the moment, the team have something of an advantage, even though they're behind on kills. But with the Yugomo keeping Steinsvarg wrapped up down here, that frees up the enemy Pommern and the Musashi to not only heal some health back, but also head over there to deal with the Kitakazi and the friendly Pommern. Steinsvarg cannot keep running from the Yugomo, because if he does, one of 2 things is going to happen. Either the Yugomo will eventually catch him and sink him, or he'll end up being the last one left alive on his team against 5 enemies, as his other 2 surviving teammates over on the eastern flank just get overwhelmed. Now, the friendly Pommern and the Kitakazi between them are fighting a great action over there. They have just between them sunk the enemy Musashi, and that's a good thing. Unfortunately, at more or less exactly the same point where Steinsvarg realises he needs to turn around and try to not at least die to the Yugomo, I think the Kitakazi has gotten himself within radar range of the Tulsa. Yep, the Tulsa just popped up again, which can only mean he's firing his guns, which can only mean the Kitakazi has been spotted by radar, which means the Kitakazi is going to die. It's just a question of whether or not you can take the Tulsa down with him, and he could not. 2 of them left alive. Did you know the direction that those Yugomo torpedoes were coming from, by the way? He's a tricky little bugger, isn't he? And he is going to keep us guessing. Oh, and there's the Tulsa. He's out shooting range. It's only the Pommern that can do anything about him. And they are... Well, somebody just took a hit there, because the enemy team are trying to flip the cap circle at Bravo. But the progress got reset. If it was the Tulsa, I mean, he was on low enough health, I think a hit from the Pommern would have probably killed him, unless it was a secondary hit. Anyway, note that the Yugomo's torpedoes are now coming from the starboard side. And that's really interesting, because here's the problem that the Yugomo, or any destroyer pursuing and trying to torpedo a battleship, has. Let's say your torpedoes are doing 60 knots, but the target that you're trying to torpedo is running away from them at 30 knots. That means that your torpedoes only have a speed relative to the target of 30 knots, which gives the target more time to evade them once they're detected, but also means that the pursuing destroyer has to get uncomfortably close before they launch the torpedoes in order to give them an actual chance of catching up. And there goes the Pommern. Steinsvarg is now the last ship left alive on the team against 4 enemies. So what I'm pretty sure has happened here is that the Yugomo thought, well, that's a bad situation for me to be in, so I'll engage... Yep, they're now coming from behind. The Yugomo had engaged his engine boost in order to get into a flanking position on Steinsvarg, so his torpedoes wouldn't be playing catch-up and giving him the best possible chance of actually being able to get a kill. And that would have worked as long as the target continues to try to run away. The Yugomo didn't anticipate that Steinsvarg was going to put his man pants on, turn around and head back the other direction. So the Yugumo, in trying to outthink Steinsvarg, ended up actually outthinking himself and is once again in a pursuing position, which is, you know, bad for him, good for Steinsvarg. He's now reflipping this cap circle. He is, of course, still spotted by the Yugumo because, you know, obviously. But the enemy team no longer have points coming in from this cap circle. They are still 40 points ahead, though, and both teams are gaining points at the same rate, which means the enemy team are still going to win, unless Steinsvarg manages to flip this cap and stay alive. He doesn't even have to hold the cap. He just has to flip it and stay alive by motoring north and staying out of the way of the Yugumo. And it's here where the Yugumo makes his first real mistake of the game. He's thinking, I have to reset this cap. And, well, he's partially right. Somebody has to reset the cap. But it doesn't have to be him. Although maybe it does, because while he's keeping Steinsvarg spotted, I don't think anybody else shooting from across the map has actually managed to hit him. I think the Yugumo is the one doing all the resets. Unfortunately for the Yugumo, resetting the cap means revealing your position while you're within range of a Prinz Ruprecht's secondaries. So this was a remarkably poor decision from the Yugumo. Up until now, hadn't really put a foot wrong, and ends up with the enemy team 4 points away from winning on 996 points, and instead only succeeded in flipping the scores, with the points from the Yugumo's death putting Steinsvarg on 996 points, 2 ticks away from the victory. You can see the Yugumo's thought process there. He clearly thought somebody had to reset that cap or they were going to lose. And Steinsvarg had managed to get some islands between himself and the rest of the Yugumo's team, so the Yugumo was clearly thinking, well, it has to be me. Unfortunately, the Yugumo should have paid a little bit more attention in mathematics class. Because he was wrong. All he had to do, in fact, was nothing. Ah, well. It's not like we haven't seen this happen before. Finally, before we finish, there was something that I promised to talk about earlier in the game, but I never really ended up having the chance. And it's to do with the concealment and the firing range of the Prinz Ruprecht secondaries. It is one of the few ships in the game that is theoretically capable of stealth shooting in open water, because firing your secondaries doesn't give your position away, just your main battery guns. And these secondaries have such long range, and the stealth on the ship, if you build for it, is so good, that you can technically have a 200-meter window of opportunity to hose a target down with your secondaries before you get close enough for them to spot you. Practically, next to impossible to do, but theoretically, this is actually a stealth-firing open-water gunboat. And on that bombshell, that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed it, and as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.